Welcome to the Connect with TrueSight webinar. During today's webinar, you're able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions and answers, along with the webinar recording, will be posted on the YouTube channel a week from today's broadcast. The topic this month is TSCO, Best Practices Using the Gateway Manager. Michael Paska will take us through this content. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Michael Paska, and I'm a Principal Technical Support Analyst for the TrueSight Capacity Optimization product. I've supported what's currently known as the TrueSight Capacity Optimization Gateway Server for a little over 24 years, and I've supported the TrueSight Capacity Optimization product since 2011. Let's take a look at today's agenda. In today's Connect with TrueSight webinar, we'll be discussing some best practices related to the TSCO Gateway Server and Gateway Manager. This includes the creation of agent list-based manager runs, the use of AutoETL and the benefits of that feature, options for monitoring the processing of nightly manager runs, some options for recovering from some common data processing or ETL failures, and a short list of reference materials associated with those topics. I'll be demonstrating the creation of an agent list-based manager run, and later I'll demonstrate some of the things to look for in relation to monitoring and recovering from manager run failures. One note, for simplicity, I'll be referring to manager runs scheduled on a TSCO gateway server running on Linux. The TSCO gateway server also runs on Microsoft Windows, but that's generally more appropriate for lab deployment than nightly automation for a production scale environment, and there are some differences between how the consoles internally automate the runs and name some of the files. There are two different types of manager runs that can be defined via the gateway manager. The best practice agent list-based manager configuration and the older legacy manager run configuration. In the legacy manager run configuration, the TSCO administrator needs to manually create each domain file with a specific list of computers in each one. Those defined domain files will then be associated with the desired manager run, and the TSCO administrator will need to create multiple manager runs associated with different domain files if there are lots of computers that need to be defined for data collection. An agent list-based manager run is a run whose computer list is defined via a text file rather than a collection of domain files that have been created by the TSCO administrator. The primary benefit of an agent list-based manager run is decreased administration effort in the creation, scheduling, and update of the manager runs and the list of computers scheduled for active collection in the environment. The administration difficulty with the requirement to manually associate computers to domain files and domain files to manager runs is really what led to the creation of agent list-based manager runs. In this configuration, the TSCO administrator defines a text file with a list of computers for data collection, and the TSCO gateway server will automatically distribute those computers across the appropriate number of domain files and the appropriate number of manager runs as necessary. For example, using the default run configuration, a computer list that is defined with 500 computers will be split across 20 different domain files, 25 computers per domain file, and those domain files will be split across 5 different manager runs. As the text file computer list is updated over time, computers being added, computers being removed from the list, the manager runs will be updated automatically on a nightly basis, keeping the collection and processing of computers in sync with the current computer list. The best practice configuration for manager runs is to use the gateway manager to define an agent list-based manager run. The UI to define those runs is accessible by drilling into the desired gateway server via the gateway server's list in the gateway manager. This will open the window where the list of current agent list-based manager runs can be displayed and new runs can be created. Let's demonstrate the creation of a new agent list-based manager run now. Creating a new agent list-based manager run is easy. Start by creating the agent list. Each line can contain either a single host name, which will be used as both the network name of the computer and the display name of the computer, where the display name is what the computer will be named in TSCO, or the line can be a comma-separated line, where the first field is the network name and the second field is the display name for the computer. After the agent list has been created, under Gateway Manager, Gateway Server, select the gateway server where the manager run is to be scheduled. This will bring up the agent list table, which contains a list of existing agent list-based manager runs. Click the Add button to bring up the wizard. Click Next on the intro screen to begin the run creation. The name parameter here will be the name of this manager run. It should not contain any spaces. The computer list must reside on the machine where the web browser accessing the UI is running. it must have a .txt extension and will be selected in the first screen of the wizard as the local file parameter. In general, the default directory paths, such as user, ADM, best_workspace, automation shown here, are the best options to select. On the TSCO gateway server, these directories could be replaced with symbolic links or separately mounted file systems if it were desirable to redirect the output. This screen allows for the selection of various output directories related to the manager run. Again, here, the defaults are going to be the best options to select. In relation to the TSCO agent data, there are two different summarization periods. First, the GWS, or Gateway Server, processing summarization interval, determines the summarization of the data in the TSCO database. So this is the granularity of the data processing done by the nightly manager run where the viz file is created, and will be the granularity of the data at the detail level when the data is imported into TSCO. Second, the agent summarization interval determines the summarization of the data in the UDR data files generated by the TSCO agent itself. This granularity affects the data in Web Investigate, where it is accessing UDR data files on a TSCO gateway server rather than the TSCO agent directly, and is the minimum granularity at which data can be reprocessed. In this example, data will be summarized to 60-minute data points in the TSCO database and in the viz file created by the nightly manager runs, but will be summarized to a 15-minute interval in the UDR data itself. This can be useful to allow an opportunity to reprocess the data at a future date with a higher granularity, or to do a more detailed ad hoc analysis of the data using another TSCO gateway server component such as Analyze or Predict. In this example, the Edit Advanced Settings box is unselected, but when selected will present additional configuration customization options for the manager run. Note that not all manager run configuration options are accessible via the wizard, and any options that can't be defined here will be picked up from the current default manager run configuration, which can be customized via the Gateway Manager as necessary before starting the wizard to create a new run. At this point, we're ready to submit the run. Once the Finish button is clicked, the run will be submitted to the gateway server, data collection will be started, and data will be processed into a viz file on a nightly basis. Depending on the configuration, data may also be automatically imported into the TSCO database if AutoETL has been configured, or an ETL has been separately created to import data from this manager run. So now that we've seen how to create an agentless-based manager run, another useful feature that's associated with that is AutoETL. What is AutoETL? It allows TSCO to automatically create ETLs to import data into the TSCO database. It simplifies the administration of the TSCO gateway server data import, so it allows the product to manage the creation of ETLs automatically and ensure that every manager run that is active on a gateway server that you want imported into the TSCO database is associated with an ETL. As manager runs are removed from the gateway server, they'll get removed from the ETL configuration. As manager runs are added to the gateway server, they'll get added to an ETL configuration. It complements the agent list-based manager runs where additional manager runs may be generated automatically as the computer list grows. So after an agent list manager run has been submitted with a starting computer list, it's possible to add several hundred additional computers to that list. So at night, when the next day's run is reinitialized, new manager runs will be created to handle the data processing for all those additional computers. If an environment isn't using AutoETL, then something would need to be done on the ETL side to keep the manager run list in the ETL synchronized with the list of active manager runs on the gateway server. AutoETL isn't enabled and configured for particular manager runs. It's enabled at the gateway server level. This means that all of the chain controllers and ETLs it creates will have a consistent configuration for that gateway server. It is controlling how many manager runs are associated with each ETL. AutoETL is looking at the manager runs that are defined and distributing those runs across multiple ETLs to ensure that no one ETL is overloaded with manager runs to be processed. The default is to associate 5 manager runs per ETL. Using the default agentless configuration, that would mean that no ETL would be importing more than 20 viz files per day. The idea being that if AutoETL needs more ETLs to manage the number of manager runs that exist, AutoETL is going to create new ETLs. AutoETL also allows ETLs to be balanced across multiple ETL engines. AutoETL can be configured to have a number of ETL engines associated with the gateway server, and then ETLs will be distributed across all of those ETL engines. There'll be a chain controller created for each ETL engine, and ETLs will be scheduled within that chain controller, allowing the ETL execution to be throttled. When isn't AutoETL an option? And when is it necessary to manually create ETLs to process viz files created by manager runs? So if you have ETL run configuration properties that must be different across ETLs on a gateway server, then AutoETL can't be used. For example, say you have some agent list manager runs that should be configured to import the detailed disk network data, but other agent list manager runs on that same gateway server shouldn't have that data type enabled. There isn't any control in AutoETL that allows different settings for some manager runs versus others on a single gateway server. Although it's possible to reconfigure an AutoETL created ETL after it's been created, and those manual changes won't be reverted, it isn't possible to authoritatively control which manager runs will be associated with which ETLs. And although it won't usually happen, there are events that can cause manager runs to shift to different ETLs. A significant reason is that an environment requires a root workspace domain to be different across different manager runs on the gateway server. For example, the scenario might be that you have multiple workspace domains broken down by data center, and a gateway server ETL is processing manager runs across those different data centers, but you want each data center to be represented in its own workspace domain in TSCO. AutoETL doesn't support that configuration. AutoETL supports the definition of one single configuration that is applied to all ETLs that process manager runs from that gateway server, which includes the workspace domain folder in TSCO. AutoETL controls the assignment of manager runs to ETLs and ETL engines. It isn't possible to control via AutoETL where viz files for a particular manager run will be processed. AutoETL is only able to configure the ETLs to run once per day. Thus, a scenario that isn't supported is a non-standard configuration where TSCO gateway server ETLs have been configured to run multiple times a day. To give an example, having 12-hour manager runs which run twice a day and ETLs configured to run twice a day to import that data. Here's a sample AutoETL task chain with two children that were created. So what you have is a task chain for the gateway server. The default name of the task chain is gateway server underscore gateway server name underscore scheduler ID of the ETL where the task chain's running underscore 0. For the ETLs, it's very similar where the AutoETL created ETL name contains the scheduler ID on which it's been scheduled. And then the last value in the name is the task ID of the ETL. So in this example, you'll see the last part of the ETL name is 55 for ETL task ID 55, and the last part of the ETL name is 56 for ETL task ID 56. One task chain will be created per ETL engine that has been defined as a valid target for AutoETL runs. As ETLs are created, they'll be distributed across the available ETL engines and associated with the existing task chain created for that ETL engine. When the task chain is initially created by AutoETL, it will be scheduled at the time set in the AutoETL configuration. Once the task chains have been created and scheduled, it is possible to manually adjust the execution time if a different time is later determined to be better. Once AutoETL has created the task chain for an ETL, it does not resynchronize the task chain configuration on future runs, so manual changes will persist. This is the same for ETL run configuration changes. An example where this is useful is if a task chain has initially been scheduled to run at, say, 6 a.m., and then it was later identified that the manager runs are consistently finishing much earlier in the day. This task chain should be manually rescheduled to start earlier in the day. What's managing AutoETL? The gateway server admin helper system task is scheduled to run once per day and services two purposes within TSCO. It queries each gateway server configured for AutoETL, and it ensures that there is an ETL associated with every scheduled manager run under AutoETL control. and it updates the TSCO database with the information necessary to build the Gateway Data Feed Health Report. This is the BCO-EE data visibility table, which is the foundation of data for other things in the TSCO UI, such as the Gateway Server, Gateway Manager list nodes view. What features are available in TSCO to monitor the daily data flow, diagnose problems, and trigger recovery events when necessary? There are two reports available for daily monitoring of the TSCO Gateway Server data flow. Both of these reports can be configured to be sent via a daily email message. The Gateway Manager UI is the interface for managing the Gateway Server, and it provides many features for monitoring, diagnosing, and recovering manager-run problems. Let's start by taking a look at those reports. The self-monitoring Gateway Data Feed Health Report can be created from an out-of-the-box advanced report template available in TSCO. We typically create this report in the workspace under Administrative Domains, Self-Monitoring, Works folder. Just have a standard place to look for it. The reference section of this presentation contains a link on how to define this report in TSCO. Here you can see an example of the Gateway Data Feed Health Report. This report provides an overview of the overall number of TSCO agents that made it through each stage of the nightly automation: collect, transfer, process through the gateway server, and import into capacity optimization, and that's a view over the last 30 days. This report includes an overall view of all the gateway servers importing data into your TSCO environment and a breakdown by gateway server further down in the report. Now that we've seen the Gateway Data Feed Health Report, let's take a look at the General Manager Lite report. The General Manager Lite reporting is quite dense and can be intimidating to the uninitiated, but it's one of the best sources for information regarding the top-level success of the nightly processing for the manager run configured in an environment. Unlike the Gateway Data Feed Health Report, the General Manager Lite reporting provides an overview of the nightly data flow over time via a text-formatted email rather than PDF, and also provides an additional detail level, breaking the status down at the manager run domain level. General Manager Lite reporting is configured on the TSCO gateway server, and in addition to the email it generates, it also creates additional reporting on the TSCO gateway server itself for investigating gateway server data flow problems. It can be configured to only report on the status of automation on the gateway server itself, so reporting collect, transfer, and processing status, or it can be configured to additionally query the TSCO database to report on the status of data import into TSCO for each entity processed by the gateway server. The primary section that will be useful in the daily email is the daily end-to-end success count overview table. This is the table that breaks down the collect, transfer, processing, and, if configured, import into TSCO success count across all servers. I'll refer to this section again later when talking about basic troubleshooting for some common data processing issues. Now let's take a look at this report. The summary section at the top of the report provides a brief overview of the change between today's data flow and yesterday's data flow. The idea here being that significant changes in the success rate of data collection will need to be investigated as a priority. For example, this report is showing a decrease of 70 computers making it through the transfer phase, which will need to be investigated. The File System Details section provides space utilization reporting on select file systems in the TSCO gateway server. This can be useful to quickly monitor that there isn't a file system space utilization problem brewing in the environment. The list of file systems to be monitored is configurable during the definition of the report on the gateway server. The daily end-to-end success count overview section is the most important section for monitoring the gateway server and is usually where I start with this report. Each line lists the date, the number of computers configured for collection, the number of computers that successfully collected data, the number of computers that successfully transferred data, the number of computers that successfully processed data, and finally the number of computers that were successfully imported into the TSCO database. For example, notice that things have been relatively consistent here, except for the latest day where no computers were successfully transferred or processed, and a single earlier date showing a slight drop in processing and a significant decrease in the volume of data imported into the TSCO database. Additional sections further down in the report, which for the sake of time I won't cover here, break the data flow success down even further, first by manager run domain file, and then another breakdown showing a success count by processing stage for each manager domain. Now let's take a look at the screens available in the Gateway Manager for monitoring, managing, and recovering nightly manager runs, starting with the List Node screen. The Gateway Operations List Node screen provides a useful summary table of information regarding TSCO agent data being imported into the TSCO database. Key features include the Export to CSV button, which allows the table to be exported from TSCO, imported into Excel, and then used for analysis. For example, an analysis of TSCO agent versions deployed across the environment. The table reports the last time an entity successfully reported data into TSCO, allowing for a quick list of entities with data import problems. The table reports the ETL ID of the last ETL to successfully import the data for that TSCO agent into the TSCO database, allowing that ETL to be identified and investigated in the event of a data import problem. The Gateway Operations Status Recover Run screen presents both the status of the collect, transfer, and processing of each scheduled manager run, and allows for the execution of recovering data processing if there's been a recoverable data processing failure. This screen is generally the easiest way to execute data processing recovery via the Gateway Manager UI when that's necessary. The Gateway Manager node history provides a by computer, by day view of data collection, transfer, or processing failure. For data collection problems, the numeric error code associated with the collection failure is reported and is a clickable link into a more detailed error message. Each of these error codes is searchable in our knowledge base. This information is also available in General Manager Lite reporting on the TSCO Gateway server with a direct link to each error code in the master knowledge article that provides general information, or when available, additional details for each error code. The Gateway Reports Exception Report screen provides a breakdown of status information by day by manager run. It also provides quick access to recover a particular manager run or access the manager run configuration for that run. This isn't a screen that I often use for debugging purposes, but it can provide a quick, good summary when investigating the processing status of a particular run. The Gateway Logs Manager Run Logs screen provides Gateway Manager UI access to two very useful logs. One is the processday.out file for the selected manager run for the selected day. This is the output file created by the manager run's processday script, which contains all the output associated with the day's data processing for that run. This is the most useful source of debugging information regarding nightly manager run processing issues and should be reviewed whenever there's a data processing failure, meaning a failure beyond data collection or data transfer. The other log file is the UDR Collect Manager logs. The UDR Collection Manager process is what manages data collection and data transfer for a manager run. So if there's a data collection or data transfer problem with the run, it will be visible on the Gateway Manager side in these logs. These logs are a really good source of information when investigating the nightly manager runs, and this UI is a quick way to access them without logging into the TSCO Gateway server. Now that we've looked at the reports and the Gateway Manager UI, let's talk about some additional General Manager Lite reporting that's available. As noted earlier, the General Manager Lite reporting sends a status email message daily that contains status over time information for the nightly manager runs. But there's additional reporting available on the TSCO Gateway server that is created by General Manager Lite when it runs. The BCO BPA Node Timeline report provides a breakdown by computer by day of the status of data collection, transfer, processing, and import into TSCO. If there's a searchable error code associated with the failure, and there will be for data collection and data transfer problems, it includes a link directly into a knowledge article that describes that error code. This file is in CSV format, so it can be loaded into Excel and transformed, say, via a pivot table to do really useful data processing flow analysis for debugging purposes. The BCO duplicate nodes file lists computers which are duplicated across manager runs, since a computer should only be part of a single manager run. Now, a common reason for data collection problems is that the TSCO agent is either not installed on a machine or it's not accessible via the service name import on that machine. The failed nodes no agent provides a list of computers where that is the case, allowing for a quick focus on these machines. The failed nodes.csv contains computers that failed the full collect, transfer, and processing data flow for reasons other than the TSCO agent being inaccessible in the service name import. These types of problems are generally more involved to debug, so it's useful to separate them off to their own list. There are other reports available in the General Manager status output directory, but these 4 are the most commonly used for troubleshooting. These are all commands accessible via the command line of the TSCO gateway server. I wanted to highlight that there are useful command line interfaces into much of the information that's visible in the Gateway Manager UI, because it can be helpful to leverage these tools during problem determination or as part of an automated monitor implementation. I don't have time to go over each of these commands in details, as several of them are very feature-rich and could have their own webinars built around them. But very quickly, the General Manager client is a command line client to General Manager server functionality. Since all of the Gateway Manager UI communication is done via the General Manager server, that means that all the same information is accessible via the General Manager client command line. The command has a substantial command and argument set, which will require experience to become proficient at, but using it can be very useful. The UDR collect stack command is another very powerful way to obtain information regarding the status of data collection or data transfer from a computer in a manager run. It allows for formatting flags to be specified, which will allow the extraction of individual pieces of information maintained by UDR Collect Manager for each computer for each day. For example, this command can be used to query elapsed data transfer time for each individual computer on a particular day on a gateway server. The formatting codes are described in detail in our knowledge base. The list manager runs command lists each scheduled manager run and can also extract configuration properties from the vcommands file that defines the manager run. This command with the appropriate flags is a quick way to map each manager vcommands file to its active manager output directory on the gateway server. Finally, when debugging data collection or data transfer problems, it will often be useful to have access to the TSCO agent-side log files, and it may be difficult to obtain login access to the machine where they reside. The BGS agent logs command provides a way to stream the log files from the TSCO agent back to the TSCO gateway server, assuming that the service daemon is accessible in port 10128 on the machine. One aspect of the nightly manager runs that I'd like to highlight is that there are some files that are not cleaned up on a nightly basis when the manager run completes, because those files are required for data processing manual recovery purposes. For example, clicking the recover button in the Gateway Manager UI. Although there is delayed compression or cleanup for UDR data files, there's no delayed cleanup functionality in Manager for its output files. So those undeleted files will accumulate each day in the Manager output directory for the life of the run. Due to this, it can be a good idea to implement a delayed cleanup. For example, cron scheduled cleanup for these files to better manage file system utilization on the TSCO gateway server. A sample script is provided at the end of the configuration best practices for TSCO gateway server knowledge article, but any cleanup script that is written to target the correct files after the correct period of time can be used. One word of caution when implementing a cleanup is that the script with the manager extension in the manager output directory is created when the run is first submitted and then is not updated beyond that. That means that the cleanup script looking for files older than a certain date in a manager output directory must be written to exclude the deletion of the .manager script. The manager script is what runs each night to initialize the manager run, and thus deleting it has the same effect as aborting the manager run. Viz files will accumulate in the manager output directory for a year, but then will begin to overwrite older ones as the viz file name is unique by day of the year, but not unique by year. Now let's talk about troubleshooting some common TSCO gateway server problems. A problem related to the import of TSCO agent data one may see is that some of the TSCO gateway server viz parser ETLs have stopped running. This may be due to the ETL engine where the ETL is running being offline, or another problem preventing the chain or ETL execution on the ETL engine. One reason it might not be executed is that the task chain may have been unscheduled manually and accidentally not rescheduled. Another possible reason is that an ETL execution hung, and that's hung the ETL task chain, which is still running, waiting for that ETL to finish. And now that task chain will wait forever or until the TSCO scheduler is restarted. Once a problem has been identified and corrected, this is a situation that is often easy to recover from by simply manually executing the ETL task chain. The ETL will automatically know the last time it successfully imported data, contact the TSCO gateway server, and obtain the correct viz file for processing. The strongest recommendation I can make here is that early detection of this type of problem is critical for easy recovery. In an environment where the general manager light reporting is being monitored daily, and this problem can be detected within a business day of when it occurred, then recovery effort may be as easy as a click of a single button. If the ETL problem results in a data gap, rather than just the most recent data not being imported, it results in a gap of missing data followed by a successful import, it may require the use of a standard recovery ETL and staging of recovery viz files into a defined input directory. Let's take a look at this type of recovery. Let's start with the General Manager Light status reporting. Here we can see that although data has been successfully collected, transferred, and processed into a viz file, none of those computers have made it into the TSCO database for several days. Now let's review the TSCO Gateway Server Viz Parser ETL. In this case, since no computers are importing data, we're looking at a top-level problem with the ETL execution. Under Administration, ETL and System Tasks, ETL Tasks, we can see that the last exec time for the Gateway Server ETLs and their chain controller is several days ago, and this corresponds with the last time the ETL imported data. We can also see here that the ETL task chain is not currently scheduled, which is the root cause of this problem. We can fix this problem by scheduling the ETL task chain. For recovering, we can simply manually execute the task chain, and the ETLs will run and successfully import the missing data. This is because the ETLs have a last counter value that reports the last time period of data successfully imported into TSCO for each manager run associated with this ETL. The ETL will look for all viz files on the gateway server back to the defined last counter values. Now that we've looked at an ETL side problem, let's look at a problem on the gateway server itself. Depending on the underlying cause of the problem, this one can be initially hard to detect because the scheduler that triggers the execution of the nightly manager runs, called pcron, is also the scheduler that triggers the execution of the general manager light reporting. This means that the symptoms of this problem may be that general manager light email stops arriving, and that lack of reporting being generated can be the type of problem that could easily be missed. In general, once a manager run is scheduled on a gateway server, it will continue to run properly every day until the run expires or the gateway server is retired. But the execution of the nightly manager run is reliant upon the pcron job scheduling, which is scheduled in the user's cron tab, being executed properly throughout the day. In some environments, the TSCO gateway server installation owner account may be set to expire, and when that happens, access to cron will be immediately revoked on the machine. Other environmental problems, such as system reconfiguration that results in cron access being removed from the TSCO gateway server installation owner, can have the same effect. If cron isn't crawling pcron, and pcron isn't running the manager script associated with each manager run, the runs will not be initialized and none of the data processing scripts will be created. If the lack of active manager runs to collect data is detected quickly on the same day, this problem can be very easy to recover from simply by manually executing the manager script to force the initialization of the run for that day. That will get everything started just like the automation had done it. And due to data collection requests already having been registered on the agent side days in advance, there won't be any sort of data collection gap. The regular nightly automation flow should take over from that point. If the problem isn't detected quickly, then this type of problem can require considerable recovery effort, as there isn't an automated way to recreate the daily transfer data or process day scripts required that would have been created by the nightly automation to transfer and process data. There are manual recovery options available, scripts to recover data transfer and ad hoc manager run creation to recover the data processing. But these are a significantly more complex option than catching the problem on the day it happened and fixing it. Let's take a look at a scenario where manager run data processing has failed. The general manager light reporting would again be a good place to initially see there's a problem. But this time, let's start by looking at the ETL execution. We can see that the ETLs have ended in warning state. The run history shows the number of loaded entities as -1, and the run history details show both the number of loaded configuration samples and the number of loaded performance data samples as 0. Viewing the complete log shows that there weren't any viz files found for data extraction during the nightly execution. The Gateway Manager Status Recover Run screen provides some indication of what's happened here. Note that the manager run status lines for August 3rd, the date of the failure, which is in this staged example representing yesterday, are totally missing from the table. In order for a run to remain in the table after it moves out of running status, the manager exceptions command must execute, which is the last step in the nightly data processing. When a manager run is missing from this table, it means that the nightly processing scripts were never executed, or the execution failed before the run was able to process data and move to finished status. Fortunately, the manager computer failure recovery script in the Best One Home BGS scripts directory on the gateway server provides an easy way to recover from this. To recover from this scenario, just run the manager computer failure recovery script, and it will execute the data processing scripts for the failed date in recovery mode, which will then generate the viz file. Since there hasn't been a subsequent import of data into TSCO by the gateway server viz parser ETL, it will automatically detect the reprocessed viz files in its next execution, or you can manually run it after the recovery script is completed. Next, let's look at another gateway server manager run problem. As mentioned earlier, some files will accumulate over time in the manager output directory, and if the delayed cleanup option hasn't been configured well for the available disk space, it's possible for an environment to run out of disk space in one of the three main directories. Best One Home, the TSCO installation directory, which contains directories with logs, statuses, and user-defined files, the console UDR data repository, or the manager output directory. Of these three, the console UDR filling up is by far the easiest to recover from. Simply fix the disk space problem and use the recover button to recover the nightly manager runs. That will retransfer the data and reprocess it. It may be necessary to use a manual recovery gateway server ETL to recover the data import into the TSCO database, but that's a well-defined process that just requires the desired viz input files to be staged somewhere in a standard configuration recovery ETL to be executed. The recovery of the Best One Home file system or the manager output directory file system filling up can be a much more involved process and require a subject matter assistance, depending on what was corrupted and where the file system filled up. By far, the best way to handle this problem is to avoid it entirely by monitoring the file system space consumption of these three file systems. The General Manager Lite email contains a section where file system utilization will be reported. When possible, having system-level monitoring of file system utilization for the TSCO gateway server is definitely a best practice configuration. Let's take a look at a scenario where the UDR console data repository is filled up on the TSCO gateway server. Starting with the General Manager Lite reporting, we can see that there's been a complete failure of the data transfer phase for all computers associated with this gateway server. Under the Gateway Manager, Gateway Reports, Node History, we can see that all computers have failed the transfer phase with an error code 27, which is a file system full condition. Since this happened across all computers in the manager run and during data transfer, it's likely this is a problem on the TSCO gateway server side with a console UDR repository full. At this point, it would be necessary to log into the TSCO gateway server via command line terminal to investigate and resolve this problem. Here we have DF output that shows that the TSCO console UDR data repository is in fact full on the gateway server. Once the problem with the file system full condition has been fixed, return to the TSCO Gateway Manager Status Recover Runs screen and select the runs to be recovered. The execution of the recovery for the runs will retransfer the failed data transfer attempts and reprocess the data, creating a viz file for the runs. Once the recovery is completed, the last counter values can be manually reset in the viz parser ETL and the task chain can be re-executed, or a standard recovery ETL can be used to recover the data import into TSCO. A manual recovery on the ETL side is required because although data transfer failed, the nightly data processing executed and viz files were created. Although they only contain status information for each interval, no performance data, they were found by the ETL and processed, and that caused the last counter values to be updated. Finally, let's talk about a more general behavior common to most environments. Something that will happen in every TSCO environment is that the number of computers successfully collected via the nightly manager runs will degrade over time without consistent maintenance. Many of these data collection problems will be related to the natural life cycle of machines being retired, and then those machines will need to be removed from the agent lists that define the computer list for the manager runs. It's important to have a process in place to maintain the agent lists and monitor for TSCO agent-side data collection problems, such as inaccessible service daemons for computers that should still be active, failing data collection requests for systems whose underlying OS version has been upgraded, and the TSCO agent deployment is OS specific for that platform, such as AIX, or another agent-side data collection problem has occurred, such as the agent data repository file system is filled up. As with other problems described, consistent monitoring of the environment to ensure the agent list remains clean and data collection problems are addressed as they occur is a very healthy behavior here. Allowing problems that accumulate over days or weeks to build up can require a significant amount of recovery effort if all of those problems then need to be diagnosed and addressed all at once, or if those problems have led to a sufficient failure count that it masks a real data collection problem associated with a critical environment. So, to recover from failed data transfer or data processing, use the status recovery runs feature in the Gateway Manager to trigger a re-execution of the manager runs. That's the best way to do things in most cases. If yesterday's manager run failed completely and was re-executed to recover it, the nightly automation ETLs will pick up the missed viz files the next day automatically, importing both the previously missed viz files and the current day's viz files. Alternately, after the manager run has been recovered and the viz files created, the appropriate gateway server viz parser ETLs or the ETL task chain can be manually executed to immediately recover it. If there's a data gap, meaning day one failed but then day two succeeded, or if there was a data transfer failing so that nightly automation created a viz file but it was missing computers, then a manual recovery process is required to re-import the data into the TSCO database. The nightly automation will not attempt to re-import an old viz file from before its last successful import of a viz file for that manager run, even if the last viz file only included a subset of the normal computers. There's a well-defined process to create a gateway server viz parser recovery ETL that can import all viz files copied to a staging directory for manual recovery purposes. That process is described in a link in the later references section of this presentation. This is the reference section that I was referring to. These are useful reference knowledge articles related to topics covered in this presentation. I won't go over them line by line here, but they will be included as clickable links in the BMC Communities page for the webinar. In summary, agent list-based manager runs are the way to go. Whenever it can be used, AutoETL is the best practice way to manage gateway server viz parser ETLs on the TSCO side, but there are configurations where it can't be used as manual creation of maintenance of manager runs will be required. The Gateway Manager UI provides useful interfaces for monitoring, diagnosing, and recovering manager runs. The General Manager Light reporting is not exactly aesthetically pleasing, but it is a really efficient way to monitor the nightly manager runs. A consistent process of monitoring the nightly manager runs leads to the simplest recovery processes. The TSCO gateway server, like my parents' cat, is patiently waiting for you to decide that it doesn't need to be monitored anymore before it will strike. Don't be tricked by it. Recovery options are easiest when problems are caught and addressed early. When recovering failures, do it in the order from earliest to latest stage in the nightly processing. So, fix all of your data transfer failures, then any manager runs that failed to process, then any ETL executions to make recovery one clean workflow. Recovery is easiest when there hasn't been a successful import of data between the failure and the current date. Data gaps generally require more manual recovery efforts. Some problems require more advanced recovery steps. Don't hesitate to engage a subject matter expert through technical support if you want guidance on the best practice for a recovery that isn't a simple click of a button in the UI. That includes my presentation. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. And now take us through the self-help and contacting BMC, the YouTube channel where this webinar will be posted, along with a rich set of how-to videos is available. The Connect with TrueSight webinar schedule is available at this community's link. It has future webinars as well as past webinars. And for contacting BMC technical support via web, phone, email, as well as these social channels. That will conclude our webinar. It will be posted within a week of today's broadcast. Thank you.